And I will tell you something about the operational side. I work at CERT-EU, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team for the EU institutions, bodies and agencies. We are a cybersecurity team that helps to these organizations, the EU organizations, to prevent attacks and to deal with attacks when they take place. So, what are the biggest threats that we are facing? And these threats are not so different from threats that are faced at the national level. I will give you 3 examples of groups supported by nation states, cyber criminals and hacktivism. First of all, the groups supported by nation states. They can be completely integrated in the government system of nation states, like an extension of a military arm or of an intelligence arm, or they can be groups that are quasi-independent, but nevertheless supported by the states. These are the most dangerous groups. Why? Because they are the most persistent and the most sophisticated. They are often out for information that is held by EU organizations. They're interested in the decision-making process. They seek to exfiltrate information. Some of them are also into sabotage. They take sort of preliminary measures for sabotage at a future date, but most of them are interested in exfiltrating information. They generally work 9 to 5, like civil servants, and they you can see by certain attack patterns, the times at which they take place, you will be able to locate the time zone from which they operate. You can see the activities taking place in particular hours. They're very persistent. If they've decided on a particular target, they will work on targeting that particular person or that particular organization, generally until they're in. So very persistent, very sophisticated, and lots of financial means. Lots of financial means, that means that they can afford the more expensive attack tools and attack vectors. There is a black market for so-called 0 days, vulnerabilities that have not yet been discovered or addressed by the software or systems producers. So it is very difficult to defend yourself against these kind of attacks. That's the first group. They can come from different geographical nations. The ones mentioned in the press as very active are Russian groups, North Korean groups, Chinese groups, but also Western groups can be active. The second group, cyber criminals. They have become very sophisticated in the last decade. They also benefit from leakage of very sophisticated attack vectors and attack tools. And there is also production of sort of attack kits, exploit kits, that are produced by sophisticated cybercriminal groups for use by other cybercriminal groups. You can buy such a kit or rent such a kit, and they come complete with customer support. If you have trouble attacking, you can call customer support, and you can even hire other criminals to carry out the attack for you. has taken a great flight, and we have seen a lot of very sophisticated attacks coming from the cybercriminal area. They may target financial institutions. In the past, we saw attacks on bank accounts of individual people. Nowadays, there are many attacks of groups that target the banks directly. They can target very expensive, very valuable information. For example, in the area of approval of medicines, if you know in advance whether a medicine will be approved or not, this is information that is worth a fortune on the stock market. For example, let's say information relating to satellites. It can be sold on the market for very high prices. So lots of sophisticated attacks from this group, this area as well, although not as sophisticated as the ones that we see from nation-state supported organizations. And then the third group, the hacktivists. They can be linked to nation states, but often they are not. Sometimes they receive a nod from governments. It's an okay to go ahead with particular attacks. Sometimes they will carry out attacks by themselves out of patriotism. For example, the European Parliament adopts a resolution that is negative, that condemns behavior of a particular country. Immediately, you see cyber attacks on EU targets. They will carry out sometimes denial of service attacks, meaning they flood a system with information so that it effectively is cut off from the internet. Websites are not accessible anymore. Email traffic in and out is not possible anymore. They may target websites of organizations, so-called defacement, replacing information on websites with information related to the hacktivist groups. So these are three examples. One group that is notably absent in this list is insider threats. This is a threat that is globally very important, one of the foremost threats. So staff in organizations targeting the organizations themselves, either stealing information or providing access to the systems of the organization. Luckily, so far, we have seen relatively little of that at the level of the EU institutions and agencies. But globally, this is a very important threat as well. Now, given these important threats, how do we defend ourselves? What do we do? What measures do we take to defend the organizations? And again, these measures are quite similar to measures that are taken at national level to operationally defend government organizations and private sector organizations. They can be divided in 5 groups. First of all, there are preventive measures. We bring out information to the organizations we work for on new vulnerabilities, for example. As soon as a major vulnerability as information is available, we push it to the organizations we work for so that they can adapt their infrastructure and defend themselves against the threat, so that they can patch the software, whatever needs to be done for defense against new vulnerabilities. That's an example of preventive mechanism. There are many preventive actions. Then we do so-called cyber threat intelligence. We follow groups that are active. We have identified the groups that most target the EU institutions, and we bring out information about these groups to the organizations we work for, in first of all to inform them about these threats, and secondly to defend themselves operationally against particular organizations when they are targeted particularly by these organizations. So we have packages of measures for particular organizations that can be implemented to defend the organization, the infrastructure, particularly for these groups. Then monitoring. We monitor the networks of the organizations that we work for. We analyze their logs. So whenever activities take place in electronic networks, logs are generated, all kinds of different logs at all kinds of different levels. We analyze these logs and compare them with indicators of compromise to see whether there's any sign or any sign of activity or any sign of intrusion against these organizations. When there is an intrusion, we do incident response. We help the organization to identify the intrusion and to get back to normal as soon as possible, to eject the perpetrators, to analyze what may have happened in the organization, whether there has any information that has been exfiltrated, whether any sabotage has taken place, to remedy the situation and get back to normal. And then lastly, we do a lot of testing of the robustness of the electronic networks. We do this in two ways. We have in-house hackers that on demand attack the organizations that we work for to see how well they are defended, how well they are prepared. Often there is a particular goal that needs to be achieved, generally the acquisition of administrator rights. So when you have administrator rights, you can sort of decide what happens with information in the electronic network. So hackers tend to go for that. And we do it by so-called vulnerability assessment, assessing whether there are any vulnerabilities in the internet-facing parts of the infrastructure, mostly in websites. So now you know a little bit of the threats that we are faced with and the defensive measures that we take.